There is a common pattern of childhoods that CEOs had, and in this video I want to share scientific evidence that identifies those common childhoods. And in the first study, they talked about the family order. So are you more likely to be a firstborn, lastborn, sandwich child, something in between? And they analyzed 141 CEOs in small and medium-sized firms in the US. And they indeed noticed, yes, as a CEO is most likely to be a firstborn child. And now you might say, well, there are a lot of family businesses. It makes sense that the oldest siblings take over. Yes. But in this study, they also statistically separated those family businesses from non-family businesses. And still in non-family businesses, it's most likely that the CEO is a firstborn. And the effect, though, is also largely reflected by the absence of having an older brother. So if you're the second oldest, but you have an older sister, then you are still the oldest guy in the family. And then it's also still, this effect is still true, then it's more likely that you become a CEO later on in life. But generally, being the firstborn, it doesn't matter whether you're male or female, it's more likely. Specifically talking, CEOs on average have 2 other siblings, so there are 3 in total. CEOs are 45% of the time firstborn child. So it's still significantly larger. But all in all, if you pick some random CEO, it's most likely that they're not the firstborn because they could be the second or the third or the fourthborn, whatever. Okay. Interestingly, they also identified a little bit whether there is evidence that firstborn CEOs are better skilled. And they also realized, no, there is actually no difference in return on assets or sales growth. There's no clear evidence. I mean, it's more likely that you are a CEO, and we can talk about this also psychologically in a second, but it doesn't mean that you're necessarily a better CEO. You even take different set of decisions. But that's something for maybe another video. I don't want to go into that right here. Now, what might be the reason for that? Here's a hypothesis I have. The older you are in the family, it's more likely to experience the so-called parentification, which means early on as a child, you need to take on responsibilities. You need to take care of your younger siblings, and maybe it's even really too extreme where you cannot properly have a childhood and you already need to take so much responsibilities and get into this parent role. That's why it's called parentification. And now you walk through life and you're used to taking on a lot of responsibilities, taking care of others, and that role naturally fits to a CEO position who is taking care of an entire system. Now, the second study fits nicely into this hypothesis of parentification. They figured out that CEOs quite often in their childhood had to deal with a lot of adversity. They took 45 CEOs from the UK, which had at least 1,000 plus employees, and they noticed out of those 45 CEOs, 8, for example, lost their father due to death before the age of 16. Which means you have to be quite self-sufficient early on, you have to deal and cope with the world quite early on. Your father left a huge hole behind which you partly need to fill, which again is potentially called parentification here. You need to fill in this hole and step up, be sort of an adult even though you're still a child, not being a burden to your mother because she's already overwhelmed, so you take on again much more responsibility. Also, 10 out of those 45 CEOs, they went to boarding schools. So a common theme that they described in the study is this feeling of loneliness, of separation, which then of course interferes with this feeling of I need to step up, I need to take responsibility. That's a common theme right here. And though those CEOs nevertheless still generally talked about a happy childhood, even though there was this adversity, there was this feeling of separation, this feeling of loneliness, generally it was happy, and they therefore could step up to this role and learned that reflex of taking over responsibility and already taking over responsibilities that you maybe not even ready yet, but you still do that and you still have that capacity and use that, and that fits nicely into the role of a CEO. Now, with that obviously also sometimes comes challenges. The word parentification is also a spectrum. If it's sometimes too much, really people deal with a lot of struggles, constantly feel overwhelmed, just as they did back in the days as a child, feeling overwhelmed, doing tasks they feel like they cannot step up to. And nowadays you still walk around with that, still having a lot of fears and anxiety. That's also sometimes the case. All right. If you feel like this was interesting, if you feel like this opened a couple of other reflections for you as a CEO and what you went through in your childhood and how this maybe affected your personality, the way you deal with critical situations, the way you deal with stress, the way you deal with feelings such as anxiety, feeling depressed, certain fears, and you would like to talk about this with somebody, then I suggest that we have a conversation. There's a link below the video. You can simply sign up for a free first call. We can dive into your challenge, even work out a custom strategy, how you could overcome this challenge, still all for free. And yeah, I'm looking forward to talking to you soon. Make use of that. You have nothing to lose, and I'll see you around.